Hey guys, Bryce here with a little bit of a thought about technique. I'm sure you guys have been training at some point and someone walks up to you and gives you some advice about technique. So you're hearing them, you're listening to them, and they're talking about technique and you're nodding your head, and all the while you're thinking, should I trust this person? Are they experienced? Does what they're saying have merit? Should I incorporate what they're saying and actually give it a shot? And I think that kind of thought process is really worthwhile, and that it's important for us all to put up a filter and ask ourselves, is this a trusted source of information? But I want to go a little bit deeper than that today. There's this question of whether or not technique should be self-driven versus whether it should be driven by expertise. Essentially, when to trust yourself versus when to trust external sources, and what happens when they conflict. So what happens when even someone very experienced, very knowledgeable, someone you trust, gives you a technique cue and it doesn't feel good? What do we do with that information? Are we in the wrong? Did we just not apply the cue well enough? Did we not understand? Does it just take time? Should we just practice more and more? Or is it just not right for us? Should we go back to a position that feels more comfortable? So that is the question we're going to explore today. I first off want to start off with this idea that even benevolent experts, let alone just the gym bro that walks up to you, even benevolent experts who have your best interests in mind come up and ask you something about technique, they still don't live in your body. And so you know best because you know your own movement limitations, and they're really only approximating things to the best of their ability based on what they're seeing. The second part of this is, like all technique cues, we tend to structure technique cues around some golden standard of what technique should look like, and it's a good start. So, for instance, we've got this idea in our head of what a sumo deadlift should look like. It's Yuri Belkin, it's Sam Calhoun, it's your favorite Taylor Atwood, your lifter with just perfect deadlifting technique. But even then, we know that when we look at high-level lifters across federations, across weight classes, we see people pull deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, conventional deadlifts in many different ways and still achieve high success. Why is this? Well, there's a lot of inter-individual variability. We have people with different hip shapes, different femur lengths, different torso lengths, different muscle insertions. And so all of these things, even at a morphological level, let alone like a muscle physiology level, impact the way that you might lift, whether you lift slow or fast at specific points, where the bar should be in relation to the body, what pressure should be like in specific areas, what muscles should be firing in what proportion, things like that. This is the stuff of technique cues. And what I'm trying to get at is the fact that all we're doing is we're looking at this ideal and we're saying this person is or isn't close to this ideal, and we're giving them some piece of information that hopefully moves them toward that ideal. So benevolent, right? It's good. It's good intention. The problem is people have different limb lengths, and while you may be operating in good faith, we may just be looking at a totally different example in reality based on someone being constructed differently. And so we have to, at all times, consider ourselves, consider our own body and what feels best to us, even in the face of good information. I guess my own real contact with this comes from personal experience. And from that personal experience as a powerlifting coach myself, I think I get a little bit more perspective on what other athletes may be going through, and a little bit less dogmatic about technique cues, and a little bit more accepting of variation and the path of just repetition and practice over time and applied attention as one means of improving technique rather than things being entirely top down. And so what I mean is this, I squat with a pretty high bar position, and even Dennis Cornelius sent me a message few months ago saying, man, if you were only to squat low bar, like you'd put 40 pounds in your squat and things would blow up. And while it was good intention, I've tried low bar in the past and it just didn't feel, it actually felt bad. It didn't even feel good. Just a ton of elbow, bicep discomfort that just lingered and ended up affecting my bench press. And even as it is, I tend to get some discomfort there. And so while my position might not look optimal compared to other high level lifters, it still is, I think, pretty optimal for me. Similar thing with bench press grip width, which is something I just went through, so it's fresh on my mind. I tried a more, let's say, Noriega style bench press with a wider grip with my index fingers on the ring, so maxing out the grip width with the assumption that if we can get the bar to travel a shorter distance, I'd be able to press more. Instead of pressing down with my heels, pressing forward with my feet to drive my arch up a little bit higher. And it was about a 6-month journey of trying out some of these things. With some success, my grip ended up a little bit wider, middle fingers on the ring, but I really had to reposition my feet and go back to an elevated heel shoe instead of a flat shoe. And I came to this realization that, look, it's just not working for me. Like, I gave it a good shot and it just wasn't working for me. So let's talk a little about this related concept of how long you should try something, or what is the risk of trying out a new technique before it becomes not worth the risk, and how long should we try something before abandoning it? Well, I think at earlier levels of lifting, there's very little risk with trying out new technique, and by and large, there's a lot of gains to be made in working toward better technique in such a way that you'll see better progress by trying out new things. Or if you don't like something, well, great, you just go back to what you were doing, and all the while you're probably still making progress. At higher levels, assuming you've refined some things about your technique, there's a little bit more risk and probably less reward with making further technique changes that are larger in structure rather than kind of small things. And I think the technique path going forward for intermediate to advanced lifters is more self-driven rather than coach-driven. For instance, as you pay attention and figure out small things through thousands and thousands of repetitions over time. And how long should we try something for? Well, probably even the best technique changes won't feel right or good for 3 weeks or so. So we have to at least give it that amount of time for things to start feeling a little bit better, to get over changes to motor pattern and the discomfort there, and just kind of getting used to things a little bit. But after that, still, it may take a little bit longer to get used to a new technique. Sumo started feeling good for me about 6 months after I started learning sumo deadlifting. So it can certainly take some time, and you kind of have to ask yourself, how much time should I devote to this new technique change? And you'll get signs along the way that you're either headed toward or headed away from comfort. So definitely listen to those signs, listen to your body and what you're experiencing. Are you in pain on a regular basis with a new technique? Probably not a good sign that you're headed toward, golden technique perfection land. Are you handling more weight on a week-by-week basis with a new technique? Or are the weights that you had been using moving easier or faster than they did before? That's a great sign. That means you're probably headed toward a technique that's more advantageous for you. So attune yourself to those signs, and I think ultimately you'll be headed in the right direction. All right, so 2 more quick points. 1, advice from people, even well-intentioned coaches, comes from personal experience. It's almost inevitable that it comes from personal experience, because that's by and large what we have to go for. Oh, this worked for me. It worked for me really well. Maybe it'll work for other lifters. And that's a good place to start until we start realizing that people differ in pretty dramatic ways. So it comes from personal experience. And I'll give you a quick example. Let's pretend someone has a more upright posture in the sumo deadlift, or they have longer arms, or a longer torso or something like that, such that they're in a position where they end up feeling their quads quite a lot when they sumo deadlift. That's their entire frame of reference when they talk to other people about sumo deadlifting. You should feel this in your quads. And so if they see a lifter who is a little bit more leaned over, they may mistakenly apply that same cue and say you should feel this more in your quads, when perhaps their deadlift is more hamstring dominant, or perhaps they don't feel the lift in the same exact way. So cues tend to be slightly more individualized, especially when we're talking more minute things and less kind of global positioning things. We see a little bit more variation between lifters. So if you're giving advice, be careful about giving advice from personal experience, because you may be talking to someone with dramatically different leverages than you. The last point here is about, as giving advice, being okay with shades of gray and with the idea that you might not know how something feels. Technique isn't black and white. It's not as clear as tightening a wrench or flipping a light switch on and off. There are shades of gray. There's practice elements, such that something might not feel good now but may feel better later. And so when it comes to giving technique advice, implement some strategy for either range of possibilities for technique. So, try one of these 3 positions, something like that should feel good. Pay attention to X, Y, Z, use that to guide your judgment going forward. And, again, kind of using these conversations as a way to help athletes discover what works best for them. Honestly, the techniques that stick around the longest, the things that get learned the quickest are the things that come from the athlete themselves rather than are coach driven. So as coaches, we really want to instill athletes with the tools to discover good technique for themselves. Not to mention those aha moments when they finally figure things out are really worthwhile to shoot from. So that's today's thoughts. Hope you guys are doing well. See you in the next one.